Hey, welcome everybody, and we always have really cool guests on Health Talk. Joining us this morning is Dr. Tom Flass. He's a pediatric gastroenterologist. How'd I do?
It's good. Or we'll just say PEDS GI for short.
A PEDS GI, I like it. Okay.
A lot easier.
Gastroenterologist at Kalispell Gastroenterology KRMC. Now, what is Kalispell Regional Medical Center?
Yeah, correct.
All right, so you're down here in Missoula.
Yeah, I do outreach down here at least a couple days, 2 to 3 days a month. So we'll go over to the PEDS specialty clinic and do our GI clinics there instead of making everybody come to us all the time.
Well, now, we're talking kids here, and they have brand new systems. So why should there be any problems? You know what I mean? Or are there traditional things that happen in kids that you need to take care of?
So we see a whole host of things, everything from babies who aren't growing or kids who aren't growing correctly to chronic constipation, chronic diarrhea, chronic abdominal pain, vomiting. But we also are unfortunately seeing an increase in stuff like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease in kids.
Really?
Celiac disease is a lot more common than people think. Irritable bowel type of issues can also affect kids. Liver disease is something we also deal with. So pretty much any kind of host of GI disease, you know, from kind of swallowing issues, blood in the stool, a whole host of things that unfortunately are not unheard of in kids.
So when kids say, "Mommy, my tummy hurts," there could be a whole world of things you don't really know what's going on in there, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's always just sort of kid tummy aches, but
Right.
if it's a repetitive pattern or there's any kind of alarm symptoms like they're not eating, not gaining weight, or they're throwing up or having chronic diarrhea, those are things that usually kind of warrant getting checked out. You know, a little tummy ache here and there is sort of part of growing up, and we don't sweat that too much. But if there's other things going on, or it's really affecting, like they're not playing and doing things that kids should do, then I think it's worth paying attention to.
So my kid doesn't like eating avocados, which I force him to eat anyway. But when I was younger, I remember there was
No guacamole?
There was a girl that she had to drink milk most of her life. They found out later when she was like a teenager or late teens that she was lactose intolerant. And her parents felt horrible for this the whole time. Are there certain foods that kids may resist simply because their body is telling them not to eat them? And not simply because they don't like avocados?
Well, so I mean that's interesting. So there are several foods where there's something called an oral allergy syndrome, where you don't break out, you don't get anaphylaxis to it, but it either makes your mouth really itchy, or so cantaloupe, avocado, certain other fruits, where it's not a full blown allergy. You don't need the EpiPen, but sometimes it just tastes like sucking on pennies or something like that to a kid. If you ever talk to somebody who's got one of these oral allergy things, they'll eat a certain food and it'll almost be like a little mild electric shock or something like that, and they just spit it out because it just instantly tastes bad.
So you think he might really have this?
Or he gets to be picky because who in their right mind doesn't like avocados?
That's right.
So
even guacamole. I mean, this kid
yeah.
is next level dislike of avocados. So
it's
maybe he does
possible.
have this oral allergy thing.
And then the milk thing is interesting because really it's extremely uncommon for a child to be lactose intolerant. It's literally 1 in a million because as we're born, we're designed to drink mother's milk, which has lactose in it. And then as you get older, a lot of people become lactose intolerant, but usually that doesn't start kicking in until people are 8, 10, 12 years old, something like that. But milk allergy, which is becoming more common by the day, can present in a whole host of ways. The typical ways with hives and things like that, but eczema, but also babies with either constipation or diarrhea, blood in the stool, can all be as a result of cow's milk allergy. And we see a whole host of milk allergy type of things.
This guy right here, when I was born, I was a preemie, okay, back in the 50s, and preemies were big time trouble back then. Yeah. So anyway, my mom didn't nurse, so we went immediately to the cow's milk thing, and I got dreadfully sick. Mm-hmm. And she tried every goat's milk. She finally ended up by feeding me what they called mulsoy, which was a soy milk, and that was the only thing that I was able to actually keep down and begin to grow normally. So is that relatively unusual?
And I mean, there's again whether. And it probably was something in the protein in one of the, one or both of those things that you were trying. And so now we have this whole host of formulas that are hypoallergenic, as they say. So there's ones that start out as milk protein, but then they kind of partially break it down or completely break it down. And we're having to use these formulas for a lot of babies where they can't tolerate the milk protein at all. So they have to go to one of these broken down formulas, which is it's great that we have them, but if you're paying out of pocket, it is spendy, like a car payment a month kind of spendy.
Peter grew to be many things, but I don't think I'd put normal in that category of things that Peter's turned into.
But anyway.
One of the questions I had, though, about that milk allergy that this girl had, or lactose intolerance, is, it was surprising to me that it was undetected. And I was wondering, how often do you think things like that go undetected into adulthood, and how many people just live with it their whole lives?
I'd say a lot, because it's the ones, if it's anaphylactic, you can't ignore that. Your face swells up, you're having trouble breathing. It's kind of hard to ignore. But if it's just either maybe a little bit of chronic diarrhea or some stomach pains or a little, milder symptoms, it can go on for years. And so, just kind of going back to the celiac thing, they, especially for adults, they figure that people probably have had it for a lot of times 10 to 20 years before, if it ever gets detected, because it got labeled as irritable bowel, quote unquote, and that never really got checked out. But it wasn't so bad enough that they thought like, oh, I need to get this tested, and then that was, meanwhile, it was a reaction to a food, and the same thing could happen to milk. It just wasn't, quote unquote, bad enough for them to seek care about it, but meanwhile this food was causing some detriment to their health, sometimes for decades.
Maybe you could just describe for us, dummy layman here, what exactly is celiac disorder?
So celiac disease is I guess sort of a brief overview is where your body looks at gluten the way it should look at like a bacteria or a virus. We're talking
gluten intolerance.
So there's also a newer sort of described thing called non-celiac gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance, and they're a little bit different. So celiac disease actually damages the intestines. So over time, when your body keeps seeing gluten, which probably 70% of the American diet is dairy and gluten or dairy and wheat based, but for people that have celiac disease, every time you're eating gluten, there's this reaction that goes on in your intestines where the body sort of tries to attack the gluten, and then your intestine gets damaged as sort of the innocent bystander. Versus gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance, you don't have that damage going on, but it's irritating to the system, and so people can present with things like irritable bowel, or they can also have sort of non-GI complaints like chronic fatigue syndrome, skin disorders, things like that. Right. But the big difference between the two is they're different types of immune reactions, and that celiac will actually damage the intestine, can cause anemia and vitamin D deficiency and a whole bunch of other serious complaints down the line, versus really the gluten intolerance is more of like a chronic annoying thing, but it doesn't cause the same level of damage as celiac.
So there's a lot of people that I know that have gone into some of these diets that are like no gluten, and they may not even have a diagnosis of celiac disease or gluten intolerance. Do you think it's a healthy way to live if you aren't a celiac sufferer?
Well, so for celiac disease, my advice is that if you even think that you could have it, if you have chronic GI complaints, if you have any of the other kind of things that would raise the index of suspicion, is always get tested first before you try one of these diets, because once you're gluten-free, you can't do the accurate testing for celiac. So then you never know, did you or didn't you have it, or is it just you're doing a good job of being gluten-free, which actually normalizes the testing. So then if it looks like it's not celiac, but you think you could be gluten-sensitive, doing the elimination diet is really the only way to tell if you have it, because there's no great blood test or stool test or anything like that for gluten sensitivity. So eliminating it out of the diet for 4 to 6 weeks and then challenging it back is really the best way to tell. And it's tough to estimate how many people actually have it. They think upwards of maybe 5 to 8% of the population may be really gluten sensitive, but the numbers are way
So how do you tell when you restart? Do you get like a blue line across your forehead or what?
Something, the little popper pops on your back. You're done. So it's usually the symptoms come back. So if you feel better, the headaches go away, the skin stuff goes away, the irritable bowel goes away after that 4 to 6 weeks off gluten, and then you add it back, and all of a sudden, boom, that your stomach is killing you, or you're running to the bathroom all the time, or the headaches or the fatigue or the aches come back. I mean, that's pretty much the answer. So there's a bit of subjectivity done that way, but they've done tests where the people didn't know they were getting glutened, as they call it. Somebody would bake some muffins that they would feed them, and but the people didn't know if they were gluten muffins or if they were non-gluten muffins. And then the people that were truly gluten sensitive, when they got fed the non-gluten muffins, boom, their irritable bowel came back or their headaches came back.
A lot of it's psychosomatic.
And so that takes some of the psychosomatic part away from it, because the people experiencing the symptoms didn't know if they were getting glutened or not. Only the guy who was doing the testing did.
Okay, we're going to take a break. And I know that there are folks out there in our audience that have questions for Dr. Tom Flass. He's the GI guy. Can I call you the GI guy?
I'm going to get my personalized license plates that say that.
GI guy.
I wish your name was Joe. Whatever.
We're going to come right back. Our number is 721-1290. If you have a question or comment, give us a call. Hey, we're back on Health Talk, sponsored by Community Medical Center from day one. Dr. Tom Flass joining us this morning. We've been talking about pediatric gastroenterology. I like saying it rather than the GI guy. So what do you got there, John?
Yeah, Katie on Facebook wants to know, is there such a thing as leaky gut syndrome, and can eggs be a problem with that?
So leaky gut syndrome is a reality. 20 years ago, Western medicine, if you pun intended, they poo-pooed it. Cue the laughter. No, but it was really not believed in. They thought it was an alternative diagnosis, but they're finding that almost everybody who has autoimmune disease has leaky gut syndrome.
What is it?
So basically, what it means is that your intestine normally has supposedly kind of tightly woven together, and really you digest the food and it only lets the little amino acids or sugar through, like the little tiny things, so that it doesn't jazz up your immune system. But with leaky gut, something is damaging the intestine where it becomes more permeable to bigger molecules, which have more allergic potential. And so a lot of things can make the gut leaky, like if you're taking Advil all the time, if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, food allergens. Gluten itself actually can make your gut more leaky, which is kind of an interesting aside. So a lot of things can cause this increased permeability of the intestine that should normally be kind of woven together very tightly. And then that leaky gut thing potentiates or makes it more available to your body to have an allergic reaction or an autoimmune reaction secondary to food. So there's legitimate medical research going into the whole leaky gut thing.
What about the eggs?
So eggs, as a cause or an effect kind of thing, if you have leaky gut, I think you're more likely to develop allergies, and eggs are one of the top 4 food allergens.
Really?
Wheat, dairy, eggs, and soy are like they call them the big 4.
In that order?
I don't know. I think milk is by far number 1, and then I don't know if soy or eggs would be number 2 or whatever. And then some people have these when they're a child and outgrow them. Some people develop them later on in life. So it's all over the place as far as when. But all allergic disease and all autoimmune disease, unfortunately, is on the rise in the U.S.
Well, what do you get? How do you know that? How do you know it's on the rise and that it just wasn't diagnosed in the past?
So yeah, there's something called detection bias where we have better testing. So, but if even sort of empirically go back to when we were kids, how many kids in your class when you were growing up needed an EpiPen? Versus like how many, they don't even allow peanuts in school these days. So this is a very real. They look at emergency room data, how many people come in with anaphylactic shock to peanuts every year, and the numbers now are like triple what they were back in 1990.
Any idea why?
Probably a whole host of reasons. There's our diet's very different. There's so much more chemicals in our food and our environment. They call it the hygiene hypothesis. Is also another thing where we're living too clean. We should be out eating dirt and playing in poop and stuff when we're kids and things like that. Because if your immune system gets challenged when you're younger, when you're a child or a baby, it's all. If you look at like third world countries, they have a lot of nasty stuff, but they don't have autoimmune disease. Like they're dealing with parasites and bacteria and all sorts of stuff like that, but they don't have the rates of MS or rheumatoid arthritis or things like that because their immune system is kind of busy doing something else. It doesn't want to fight itself. It's got bigger fish to fry.
Now we have programs, nutrition programs here on our radio station that tout whole milk. Unpasteurized whole milk, as opposed to what you get, when you go to the grocery store, things like that. So does that make a difference? Is it healthier for people if you're going to drink cow's milk?
You mean raw milk?
Yeah, just go to the farm and get the milk.
So it's almost there's sort of two sides to that. There's one is there an increased infection risk, which I think is always the big concern especially for big dairy. Like if certain bugs can get through because it's not pasteurized, versus nutritionally, I think it's better because all evidence is now showing that fat is good for you in multiple forms, except for hydrogenated, where we had it all wrong for years and years, and that fat is not the enemy, that sugar is the enemy. So having that whole milk like that raw milk, where it's got that thick layer of cream and fat on there, that's actually, if you're going to do a dairy product, that's probably better for you than the skim milk because that fat is actually good. But, then there's the whole unpasteurized and infectious risk part of it. And that part, I can't speak to well enough as far as what the actual risk is, but I know what the concern is.
So I hear you're about to be a new dad, a second dad.
Yes.
Again, right? So my question for you is this. Are you going to raise your kids in any way different than the mass populace of Americans when it comes to allergies to try to make sure they don't have allergies when they're older?
I'd say, very much so.
Don't eat that dirt.
Yeah. Well, we do because our little daughter helps in the garden, and she ends up eating some of the dirt so and I'm okay with that. But I have celiac, so we're a gluten-free household, so she's pretty much minimally exposed to gluten, and also have some dairy sensitivities, and so generally she gets minimal exposure to cow's milk. And I was allergic to milk as a baby. I was one of those kids that needed to be on the soy formula and all that whole jazz.
Right.
So I'd say from that regard, very different. And then we try to just do a lot less processed stuff. We try to do more, we're try to support our CSAs, the little community supported ag farms and things like that, and buying local and organic, and then buying meat from local ranchers and things like that. So we try to steer away from the commercial stuff as much as possible, which I think is a good bet for a whole host of reasons, economically, health-wise, and just being a good Montanan.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Mike has a question for you, 721-1290. We have 3 other lines open, and Dr. Tom Flass joining us this morning. He's actually from Kalispell, but he visits here regularly at the Missoula Community Medical Center. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Health Talk here on KGVO 1290 AM and 101.5 FM. Now, Dr. Tom Flass, you wanted to promote a big deal you got coming up in June. What's happening?
So at the campus of Community Medical Center, we're doing a talk on celiac and gluten sensitivity on June 13th. I think it starts like 5:30 or 6 p.m. Free to the public. Just I'm going to go over what are all the differences, what are the similarities, how do you get diagnosed, what does that look like, if you are diagnosed, and then time for questions and answers. So I will be there probably from 5:30 till 7 or whatever, doing the talk and answering questions.
Great. Let's get to the phone. Mike, you're on Talk Back with Dr. Flass. Hi.
Yeah. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
When you got to the part of being we're too clean, and I can really agree with that, because when I was a kid, we were raised. You got a bath once a week in a tin tub if you were lucky.
Whether you need it or not.
Yeah, whether you need it or not. If you could sneak out, we didn't get it. But it was really interesting. I remember a bunch of us kids, and we were, probably 12 and under. And we all were talking about asthma, and we drew the conclusion that only city kids had asthma. We figured that out back in the 50s or back in the late 40s, for crying out loud. And we ate anything and everything. But the other side of it is I spent quite a bit of time as an Avon lady selling Avon. And one of the things I had was, I have this rash, I have this. And especially one teenage boy was, he has this. I said, how many times does he take a shower? Well, 4 times a day. I said, shut the shower off for a week and he'll probably go awake. I haven't got anything I could say. So being too clean and taking too many showers is not good for you.
All right, Mike, thanks for the call. So what do you think?
It's not, I would say that not necessarily the shower thing, but just overall, now there's like hand sanitizer and this sanitizer and that sanitizer, and we're spraying all kinds of stuff. And, whereas you don't want to get, you don't want to be eating raw chicken because that's not really good either, but I think the over-sanitation process can definitely negatively affect things.
So my son Elijah turns 6 today, hates avocados and showers. You are like his hero now.
So you can just run him through the dirt and...
All right, let's get Tanya. Tanya, we got about a minute and a half. Go ahead.
Mike, could you, if you haven't already done so, could you address the correlation between gut health and brain health?
Gut health and brain health. Thanks,
Tanya. Huge correlation. And that's that could be a whole nother subject of a lecture and stuff like that. But there's, I think, a couple things. One is that leaky gut. There's some evidence that if you have this leaky gut and it's letting things through that shouldn't be going through, you may also have leaky brain, and there's a guy, Dr. Perlmutter, who has a book called Grain Brain, and he's kind of a little bit of an anti-carbohydrate. He definitely believes in the more of the high-fat, low-carb type of diet. But you talk about some of the leaky gut and leaky brain things, and that some of the things that cause leaky gut will also cause leaky brain, let things through into what they call the blood-brain barrier, where it's supposed to have its own almost like kind of separate circulation or filtered circulation, and so things can kind of go through and muck up the brain. But also the type of bacteria that live in your gut definitely affect how your brain works, and the microbes, the bacteria that live in your intestine called the microbiome are considered now another organ system, almost like your liver. And if there's disturbances in the bacteria in your gut, it can definitely affect your brain. And there's huge links with like gut stuff and the bacteria and depression and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Like all these things are huge areas of research right now.
Is that specifically geared toward politicians, the leaky brain thing?
No, I think pretty much right now they should go play in the dirt.
I know, shame on me. Okay, so
I think they've been doing enough of that mud singing.
That's true.
How can we get in touch with you, real quick?
So I mean, as far as the clinic here, you can call the pediatric specialty clinic over at Community
728-4100, right?
or you can call up just to Kalispell Regional, and they'll be able to direct you. I think it's. I have to actually look up my own phone number because we just switched phone numbers.
Tom, thanks so much for being on the show. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Come back again, okay? All right.